Since 2022, I've sewn 40 wedding dresses for brides all around the world. Different designs, colors, and with each dress I've had the honor of playing a small part in someone else's love story. Today I'm starting on wedding dress number 41. And this one is the most special of them all, because it's going to be mine. But instead of beginning with a blank page or a brand new design, I'm starting with something quite old. The dress my mom wore when she married my dad, more than 25 years ago. This video is a keepsake more than anything, a memory for me and for my family. A way to hold on to the love I grew up with and to celebrate the rare and beautiful chance to make something so personal with my own hands. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy being a little part of this journey too. Instead of starting at my desk with a pen and my sketchbook, this project starts in my storage, where I've been keeping my mom's dress since we discussed the possibility of turning her wedding dress into mine. Because the first thing we have to figure out, even before thinking of design or fabric choices, is the base we are working with. So for the first time in a few years we will get the dress out of its bag, check its condition and try it on for the first time. It is a really weird feeling to look at something that feels so known but still special, and it was even more weird to try it on. I don't only want to make the dress fit my body, but also change it up a little bit. While it's still recognizable as my mom's dress, I want to turn it into mine, and I knew this would be a tough challenge, so I was really nervous at this point. So looking at myself in the dress meant to map out the parts I really liked on me and also to recognize the ones I wanted to change, while being able to balance it a little bit. And once I took off the dress, I had a fairly good plan of what I wanted to create from it. The base of the design is going to be the shape of the original dress. I really liked the slim shape and the fall of the elegant skirt, as well as the high neckline in the front and the low one in the back. Since the dress is slightly bigger on me, I can take the side seams in a little bit and the top will fit nicely. My mom's dress had a small train in the back, but instead of that, I want the hem to be slightly above the ground to be able to move around easily. And instead of the train, I want some big sleeves made from the skirt fabric. Since now I have the sleeves from the beautiful lace left, I want to use one sleeve to make longer cuffs from it and the other one to extend the waistline a bit further down, so that the bodice appears longer and the waistline can be angled a bit more dramatically. Lastly, instead of buttons in the back, I want to have an invisible zipper there and use the leftover buttons on the cuffs. I hope that this design will later reflect the original dress still, but also fits better with my body type and preferences. Since today's video is a special one to me, I'm happy to say that today's sponsor is a special one too. Craftsy has supported this channel early on, and so I'm really glad to tell you a little bit about them now and what kind of project I'm working on. Craftsy is an online platform that's all about learning new things in a fun way. They have over 2,000 classes for you to choose from, spanning all kinds of creative topics like sewing of course, but also quilting, knitting, painting or baking. You can either look for something specific you want to learn or just browse a little bit and maybe stumble upon your next hobby. I'm currently watching a beginner's course to quilting since we had our guest right on our tablecloths at the wedding. Yes, I'm filming this after the wedding since I actually only finished the dress 3 hours before we had to leave here. And I want to make a quilted blanket from it, but up until now I had no idea how to do that. Whether you're looking for courses to refine your techniques further, or in my case, if you want to learn something completely new, they offer a wide range of courses led by experts or creatives. I found this instructor Kelly Ashton, who has a ton of classes about quilting, starting with what kind of needles and threads to use to the finishing touches. I can't wait to really dive into it and start this special project. If you want to check out Craftsy, I highly recommend it. The first 1,000 people to click the link will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. Thanks to Craftsy for sponsoring today's video. Today my parents are visiting us, and the reason I'm telling you this is because my mom and I will use the time to cut into her wedding dress. After looking at the dress, checking its conditions and thinking about what I want to make from it, I know that while I want to keep the design similar, I have to use a different fabric for the skirt. There are small stains in it that make it impossible to rework it in a way that the skirt keeps enough volume, so I decided to just switch it all together. But this is more than half of the dress, and just throwing it away feels wrong, so I want to use as much as possible of it for something else. And it was actually my dad's idea to use small pieces of the dress to incorporate into my mom's, dad's and brother's outfit for the wedding. We've contemplated for some time now how we could do it and came up with a few ideas. For my mom, I already started to make a dress for the wedding. I felt like since I'm making something from her dress for me, I also wanted to make a dress for her. And today we are actually doing a final fitting on that too. To incorporate parts of her wedding dress into it, I chose to make some kind of cape-like sleeves, and I want to line them with the fabric from her wedding dress skirt. This way it will poke out whenever she moves a little bit, and I think it's a nice detail. For my dad and brother, we are going to make neckties today, and while the outside will be the same fabric my mom's dress is made from, the small lining pieces will be made from my mom's wedding dress fabric. Right now the dress is still whole, hanging behind me, and while I have to and want to do most of the reworking myself, it felt wrong to just take it apart on my own. And so that's what we're going to do today. We will separate the skirt from the top and then cut out all the pieces we need for the tie and the sleeves from it. So let's see how this will work. The first thing we did was to try on her dress for the wedding to make sure the pattern for the sleeves were correct. We actually met up a few weeks prior already where we sewed the mock-up together, so this was really mostly to cut the hem. The dress fitted perfectly and she looked so beautiful in it. And then after the fitting we got out her wedding dress and cut into it for the first time. This was really fun to do together, just ripping seams and talking about what I planned to make out of it. And it honestly went so much faster than working on it alone. Since for her dress as well as the ties, we didn't need the top part, so we hung the bodice aside for now and just concentrated on taking apart the skirt. It was actually quite a lot of work because it not only had a lining but it was flat lined as well, but with my mom concentrating on taking it apart further. And me cutting out the new pattern pieces, both sleeves for her dress, some bias tape and all parts for the ties. We actually had time afterwards to work on the ties as well. So, a lot of time has passed since we took apart the wedding dress of my mom. And I never thought I would be in this position, but I'm one of those persons who has to say I have 1 week left to make my wedding dress. My wedding is now in less than 2 weeks and I have around 6 days to make my wedding dress. Which I know isn't a lot, so let's get right into it. But let's take just one short moment to look at what we have so far, because even though my dress isn't done yet, it doesn't mean that we haven't sewn some things already. One moment. First of all, of course, we took the dress from my mom apart and we finished making everything that's made from her skirt fabric. So first of all, we have the lining skirt left, which I won't be using since I really don't like how this lining feels. And I already ordered the lining fabric I usually use for all of my projects, and of course I want to use it this time as well. So I actually don't know what to do with this. But for now I will just keep it and put it aside. This is everything that's left from her skirt fabric. I also don't think I will use those skirt scraps either, because this is mostly the parts with the stains on them, so I can't really use them as well. I also of course kept all the small things like the buttons, because I want to add them to my dress later. So that's everything that's left. And then after taking it apart, you've seen that the first thing we did was to cut all of the pattern pieces we actually wanted to make from this fabric. And in the meantime, I already managed to sew everything related to this. So first of all, we finished the 2 ties I wanted to make for my brother and my father. Please don't say anything bad about them. It's the first time I made a tie and it's more complicated than I thought. Those were the smaller parts we used, and then of course we made my mom's dress for the wedding, and it's made from a light blue silk satin, and we used the skirt fabric inside of the sleeves and also as the bias tape on the hem. So she also has like small parts of her wedding dress added to the dress she's wearing at my wedding. I really love that those details are more subtle so that you don't really see it at first, but every time she moves in the dress and the hem moves or the sleeve moves, you can see the white. And with that, everything made for other people is done. And we can now finally focus on my wedding dress. And the one thing that's still left to be taken apart is the bodice of the dress. So this is the first thing we will do today. Take apart this bodice piece and remove the lining, because I won't be using this as well on here. I really want to get the lace on itself so I can clean it up a little bit and see if there are pieces that I can't use because they're dirty as well, for example. So this is the first thing we will do today, and then once we've taken it apart, I can also see how much fabric I've got from it, and then I can finally decide how I actually want to use it for my dress. So this is the plan for today. First of all, taking it apart, and then starting to work on the pattern and getting this all sorted out. I don't think I have to refine it today, but I really want to have all the pattern pieces done and just the first look at it somehow. So I think we shouldn't waste any more time and start on it. Before I could start on the pattern, I had to finish taking apart the dress. Since we only focused on the bottom, today I had to remove the sleeves from the bodice, cut away the lining layers and remove the buttons. While removing each layer on its own, I carefully checked how the dress was previously assembled. I wanted to know as much as possible about it, since it would probably help once I would have to assemble it again, even slightly altered. I was also really curious about how many layers the bodice contains, since working with white fabric can be very tricky with being see-through, and so I wanted to have similar layers on my version in the end. Once everything was separated, I had to think about the best way to create the pattern for this dress, since I had to use the shapes of the previous dress as a base. So I decided the best way to do it was to put the bodice on the mannequin and pin it so that it would fit my measurements first. Then I could mark around the bodice directly on the mannequin to have the shapes visible on there. Since I didn't have this cool marking tape, I decided to just pin around the bodice and use the pins as a guide. Then I got out some muslin scraps and pinned them on the bodice over the pins to mark all the lines on the fabric. Here I had to feel where all the pins were underneath, which worked better than I expected. Once the bodice was traced, I decided to directly check how I want all the other pattern pieces to be arranged. With keeping in mind that the rest of the bodice had to fit on a sleeve, I marked those pieces as well, first on the mannequin and then on the muslin fabric too. Finally, I draped the skirt panels on the dress form as well. The original dress had some seams going down the dress, so I wanted to mimic that on my version. In the end, I had 4 skirt pattern pieces, 2 at the front and 2 in the back. Then I could take the muslin from the fabric and check once more if everything fits onto the lace. After that, I refined the pattern on the muslin a little bit, checking if all the seams match up before tracing it onto some paper. Since now I was completely done with the original dress, I could take apart the rest of the bodice, cutting open the sleeves and remove the buttons. For the sleeves I decided to use the pattern of the Moon and the Stars dress. I really liked the volume of them, and since I knew I wanted a similar cuff, this was a good base. The Moon and the Stars pattern is available over at my Patreon page. When making the mock-up, I decided to use a sturdier white fabric I got gifted once and had in my stash for ages, because I thought if it fits, I could directly use it as an extra layer in the dress to make sure it's not see-through. Unfortunately, the fabric frayed really weird, so I decided against it in the end. Working with it was really easy though. I traced all the pattern pieces, and with most of my bodices containing a lot of parts, I was really surprised how fast all of the pieces were traced and cut here. Sewing the bodice went fast as well, and so I was able to finish the mock-up the same day. I really like the look of it and the shape it creates. The extra piece at the bottom gives the exact silhouette I want, and so I can move on to the actual fabric. Since I've been using the same fabric for a previous project, I already had a few rest pieces I could use for the bodice parts and even the sleeves. So the first thing I did was to check out which pattern pieces fits on which fabric piece. To create the bodice piece of the dress, I decided to fuse 2 layers of the silk together to have a less see-through base to work with. By fusing the 2 layers together, it gives even more coverage than the 2 layers individually. To fuse both layers together, I iron on an extra interfacing, and while doing so, I make sure that it's heated and pressed properly to the fabric. Otherwise, it can come loose later. After it's cooled down, I can remove the paper, put the other silk layer on top of it, and iron it again really good with a piece of muslin in between. Then I trace all of the bodice pieces onto the fabric. The front panel on the fold, the 2 back panels and the smaller waist pieces. After adding the seam allowances and cutting out everything, I put the silk pieces aside and traced the same pattern piece onto lining scraps I had from the previous project as well. Then I moved on to cutting the skirt panels from the silk. They are similar to the ones from the Starry Night dress, so I already knew how to cut them out best. For this, I always traced one piece, added the needed length and then cut it out. Afterwards, I used the previous cut piece, turned it around and used it to cut the mirrored piece. This way both sides match up. To not get confused with all of those similar pieces, I made sure to number them all. After cutting the silk skirt, it was time to cut the lining skirt too. Here I had to prep the fabric a little bit before I could cut into it. With a lot of fabric you buy, you have to make sure it's either washed or ironed properly. You can clearly see how much length the fabric loses once it gets in contact with the steam, And if you don't do this before cutting, it will happen with your cut pieces or your garment, which will then probably not fit in the end. Cutting the lining skirt was easy. I just cut out in a half circle, which will later get sewn at an angle at the center front to create the sharp point. And then I had all the pieces cut out. The silk pieces for the bodice made from 2 layers, the lace layers that are left from my mother's dress, and the lining layers for the bodice. Then the sleeves, all of the skirt panels, and finally the lining skirt. The first thing I wanted to work on was the skirt. For this, I first had to prepare all the panels. I used a serger and prepped all the raw edges starting slightly under the waist. I did it this way to make sure the serger lines wouldn't press through the fabric when it snuck against my skin. And since the fabric didn't fray and the raw edges would be secured between the silk and the lining, this was the best way to do it. In order to not open up the stitches, I pulled the ends of the thread through the seams at the top. First, I sewed the seams without pins. The skirt has a lot of vertical seams, which meant a few individual panels that all had to be cut a bit on the bias to make sure the skirt gets wider towards the bottom. This means all pieces stretched out a bit since I hung them up. And since they are all slightly different, the length of them can vary now, and if I would force the 2 pieces together with pins, the longer piece would bulk at the seams.
Hi! So, one thing that I think is very important, the simpler a dress is, the more important it is to have very crisp seams, because with the simple design you have nothing that can take the focus from the seams, and therefore if they are wonky or if they aren't ironed correctly, you can directly see that. And with this dress it is exactly the same. With the simple design and the long seams on the skirt, being able to get them smooth is one of the most important things on this dress. And so I will now step by step show you how to get those wobbly seams to look perfect.
To iron the seams as smooth as possible, I first iron the seam flat. This will make sure everything is set and flattens the seam allowance as well. While doing this, I often pin top and bottom to the ironing board to have the right tension I need. Then I let it cool down completely before continuing. Usually I just sew the next piece together while waiting. Then I fold the seam open and lay it onto the ironing board. Here again I'm securing the top and bottom to have the right tension. Then I use the iron to hover over the seam a little bit. This relaxes the fabric and already helps to open the seam more. For delicate fabrics like this, especially when I use the serger at the seams, I don't want the seam pressed into the fabric so much that the outline is visible from the outside. To prevent this, I get a regular sheet of paper and cut it in half. The straight edges are then pushed against the seam from both sides, and then I can give the seam a good press. To make sure everything stays in place, I lay a piece of wood on top of the seam. The wood absorbs the moisture and puts pressure on the seam so that it cools down flat. I repeat this process along the whole seam before waiting again until everything is fully cooled down, before removing the skirt part from the ironing board to work on the next one. This way I work my way around the skirt, leaving the center front and back open, because I want to add the zipper first. This is just personal preference, because I always feel like it's easier to do so while I can lay it flat. But before I could add the zipper, I had to prepare all the pieces that would be close by it in the center back too. So next up, I added the lace to the waist parts. To do this, I used one of the lace sleeves, laid it over the silk piece and pinned it in place. Then I cut away the excess layer and laid it on top of the second piece, making sure to mirror the fabric direction. Then the lace is secured with a white stitch to the silk, and after that I could sew the waist pieces onto the skirt panels individually. Preparing the back pieces worked exactly the same, and then I could add them to the skirt as well. Since I wanted to leave the center front open, I had to only halfway sew the back pieces to the skirt, so that I could later add the front of the bodice. This looks a bit confusing, but helped a lot to add the invisible zipper at the back without too much hassle. To prepare the front piece, I had to sew the darts on the lace and the silk separately. The first reason was that I wanted to iron the silk properly without damaging the lace. But the lace layer is also slightly bigger, and so I had to finish both layers before I could again lay them on top of each other. Pin everything in place and sew around it. After that, it was easy to sew the front to the back panel and close the waist seam completely. And with that, the base dress was ready and I could move on to the lining dress. Sewing the lining dress went really fast. Since all of the pieces were prepared earlier, I now had to simply close 10 seams and was done. The part that took the longest here was to add my label. It felt kind of weird to add my name into my own dress, but I promised myself beforehand to sew it the same way as if it were a commission. Because I always struggle with taking as much time and effort for myself as I do for others, so I added my label to the center front. And with that, had the lining dress done. The last big part I had to tackle were the sleeves. I kept them for last because first I didn't really had a clue how to do them, and secondly I wanted to see how hot the weather would get to decide if I would add lining into the sleeves. The first thing I worked on were the cuffs. After I knew it would get warm, I decided to only use the lace, just like on my mom's dress. But I wasn't sure how to reinforce it with the buttons. So honestly, I just tried something out and it kind of worked. First, I took the remaining sleeve and cut it into half to make 2 identical cuffs from it. After a careful press, I cut some stripes from the silk to reinforce each side of the cuffs to have enough stability for the buttons and loops. I sewed the strips on and then folded them inwards to encase the raw edges. After carefully folding and sewing them in place, I could then mark the placement for the buttons and the loops. I just used all of the remaining buttons I had and then divided them evenly, making sure to leave a seam allowance at the top and bottom. Then I sewed on the buttons by hand with a buttonhole thread and used the same thread to make the loops. I never made loops this way, so it was a new and fun technique, and I really liked that they were a little bit stretchy, which made it a lot easier to close the cuffs. I was really happy with the results and could then move on to the top of the sleeves. For this, I closed the seam and then pinned the sleeves into the cuffs. After dividing the extra fabric evenly and pulling the previously sewn gathering thread, I secured the cuff and sleeve together with the sewing machine. This was then repeated on the second cuff, and after quickly checking everything and making sure I liked the results, I sewed both sleeves into the dress. Because of the heat, I also decided not to use the lining in the sleeve, so after this step the sleeves were done already.
Okay, so today's the last day that we can work on the dress, because later this evening we are going to drive to my parents' place because that's where we are getting married. So we have to finish the dress now. I think we're good on time. The only thing that has to be done now is to do the hems, like on the outside dress and also on the lining dress, and then to add both pieces together, like the lining and the outside dress, and then all the hand sewing stuff like working on the arm size and also attaching the lining and the zipper. And I think we're good on time. It's still quite early, so I guess we should just get going.
The first thing I did was to work on both hems. For the silk skirt, I had some previously drawn bias tape that I only had to cut out from the fabric. For this, I used my rotary cutter, and I don't know why, but I'm always a bit scared to use it. After all my strips were cut, I sewed them together and ironed the seams open so that I had one long bias tape ready. Then I cut the hem of the dress. I had the dress hang for some time so the fabric could stretch, and so I had a pretty uneven hem. So I orientated myself at the right length and then just cut around the whole dress using the distance to the floor as a guide. Afterwards, I could then add the bias tape to the hem. I always like to put my mannequin next to the sewing machine and keep the dress on it. This way I don't have to deal with the weight of the whole dress while working on the hem. I worked my way around the hem and finally added both ends of the bias tape together before I could then get the dress of the mannequin and iron the hem properly. Next up, I worked on the hem of the lining dress. Here I also had to cut a bit of stretched fabric away before folding the hem once, sewing and ironing it. And then folding the sewn hem once more to stitch directly on top of the previous seam. After pressing again, I had both hems ready and I could finally put the lining dress into the silk dress. I don't really like this step because you have to deal with so much fabric at once, but in the end it went really well, and after sewing the lining to the seam allowance for a crisp neckline, turning the dress inside out and pressing everything properly once more, all of the machine sewing was done. And as a last step I had to do the finishing touches by hand. The last thing I did was to add the lining to the zipper by hand before the dress was put into its bag. Not to be shipped out to its new owner, but for me to take it with me to get married in it. So, what's left to talk about now? Maybe at some point of this video, or maybe even when you saw that I'm making my wedding dress, you may have wondered why I didn't choose to make a new dress when I can make any dress I want. And I guess that's already sort of the point, why not? I have the honor to create dresses for brides almost every day and sew special dresses all the time. So even though I love to do that, it is somehow my normality. And when we talked about this and my mom offered her dress, I didn't even have to think about it because for me this felt perfect. Ever since I was younger, her dress was the wedding dress for me. Not in a way that I always imagined myself wearing it too, but in a way that this is how the start of a loving marriage looks like for me and what I would want for me too. And looking back now, it was the right decision. Not only because I loved the outcome of the dress, but also because of the process behind it. I could have easily made a new dress for myself. But this way, meeting up with my mom to take the dress apart, my dad's idea to incorporate little parts into all of their outfits, and then coming up with ideas how to do that was the perfect way to prepare for the wedding and already celebrate a little bit. My parents are my role models in any way, and with this dress and the creative process behind it that involved everyone, I felt like I could honor that a little bit. Regarding how the dress turned out, I am so happy. At the beginning of the video, I said that I wanted it to still be recognizable as the old dress, but in a way that it's now my own version of it. And I feel like I achieved that. I felt amazing in it, was so comfortable, and now looking back at the pictures and memories of it, I'm sure it was the right decision and the perfect dress for me. What do you think? I know it's always a little bit controversial to destroy old wedding dresses. How did you like this approach? I hope you liked today's video. If you made it this far, consider liking it and subscribing to my channel. This always helps a lot. Don't forget to check out Craftsy using the link in the description, and I hope I'll see you again in the next video.